Go.
Hi, welcome back to Yes You Can Guru. This is Jules, and today we are talking about when life doesn't go as expected. And I have my girlfriends with me, and they're here to share their stories, in particular about children with special needs. And I'm so thankful to have all of you gals here. And Mike, the cameraman, kudos to you. We appreciate you being here, listening to us girls. So first I'm going to start with Jen. She's going to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Jen. I've been married for over 17 years now, and I have two boys that are 14 and 13.
And I'm Kendra, and I've been married to my high school sweetheart for almost 18 years now. And we have four kiddos, 16, 15, 12, and 8.
And I'll just mention real quick, I'm Jules, been married for 23 years. We have 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl, 17, 12, and 6, almost 7.
And I'm Carol, and I've been married 46 years to my high school sweetheart, and I have 2 children, a daughter who is 40 and a son who is 35.
Nice. Okay, so then we're just going to talk about our story and how we had life as planned or as expected, and then how that sort of changed for us and how we handled that. So, Carol, since we just were with you, why don't you tell us your story?
Great. I married my high school sweetheart and really wanted to become a mom. So 5 years after we were married, our first child was born, a baby girl, and I was satisfied. I was happy, I was fulfilled, and I was satisfied. 5 years later, I had another pregnancy, and my son Tyler was born. Tyler had spinal meningitis at birth. He developed a seizure disorder. This wasn't what I expected, what I wanted, what I thought my life would be like. Many people gave me different little quotes. My least favorite was, it's like you took an airplane to France and everybody spoke Italian, and you weren't prepared for that. It wasn't as beautiful as France, and it wasn't as romantic as Italy, so I don't know what that was supposed to mean to me. As I said, my son is 35 years old. In those days, there weren't diagnoses like spectrum or Asperger's or that type of a diagnosis. We knew Tyler was hyperactive, he was brilliant, and he was a joy. He was always happy, but he was very literal. And we would say, jump in the car, and he would say, oh, Mommy, I'm not a bunny, I can't jump and get into the car at the same time. So we thought, well, that's kind of odd, but it's adorable, so that was fine. But as he grew older, his seizure disorder became more and more pronounced. We had him at so many specialists, and all they would tell us is that he had epilepsy, partial complex seizures, and he was hyperactive. So we thought he would live to have a very normal life. We had him in regular education. He did have some support because he had a terrible tremor, so he was not able to hold a pencil or a pen and actually write. By the time he started high school, there was a new law about a new vaccination, and he had an allergy that we did not know about. So he had an allergic reaction to the preservative in the vaccine, and he had quite a traumatic brain injury from that. At that point in time, he was diagnosed as having Asperger's, which was a brand new diagnosis that I had never heard of, but it was on the spectrum of autism, and I didn't realize there was a spectrum for autism either. When Tyler had that traumatic brain injury from the preservative, he had to be retrained and retaught all of his life skills. That was not what we planned for, what we expected. We expected him to go through high school, to get a high school diploma, get a college diploma, get married. It was very disappointing for me. I felt very guilty because I told the school he wasn't going to be vaccinated. They argued, and I had run out of steam in fighting for my son and for services. So I angrily took him to the township and had him vaccinated. On the way home from that vaccine, he started seizing multiple seizures that didn't stop for 2 days. So there was guilt. I was angry, and I reacted to anger, which is not my normal behavior. I'm very level-headed, I'm very calm, but this was something that I didn't manage well. So I had years of just such guilt. One day I woke up and I thought, wait, I love people finding out who God created them to be. I loved them to see that they weren't who their parents or their siblings or their teachers said they should be, but who they actually are. And God impressed upon me, probably while I was asleep, because that's when I listened best, that this is exactly who he needed Tyler to be. That this is how, he's not surprised that this happened to Tyler. He did not cause it, but it happened and he wasn't surprised. And Tyler was exactly who he needed to be to affect the people around him. And affect the people around him he did. It changed my life. I had a new appreciation and a new, deeper love for Tyler. I didn't need to change him. I didn't need to correct him. I didn't need to heal him. Although we have always prayed for healing, it wasn't a requirement anymore. It was just something that would have made our lives, once again, probably easier. And after living with Tyler, like I said, he's 35, all of these years, his brain injury was 20 years ago. I wouldn't change a thing about him. He's just perfect. He's joy-filled. He lights up a room. We always tease that no matter where we go, somebody knows who he is. And we could be at Woodfield Mall, we could be in London, England, and he ran into someone from his dentist's office. And it was crazy because they didn't know who I was, but they knew who he was. And so Tyler has a following of his own. And no, life did not turn out as I expected. There is no French or Italian involved at all, but he is just who God created him to be.
Yep, I would agree. Tyler is just a wonderful man. Yep, he's definitely a blessing to be around. Okay, Kendra?
So our little guy, Colden, we have our oldest is a girl and then we have 3 boys. And shortly after we got married, we got pregnant with our first. And then when she was 9 months old, my husband said, let's do number 2 and then we can be done. We can have 2 kids. We had a boy and a girl. We had them 18 months apart. We thought it was our perfect little family of 4. And then God surprised us with his own plans 2.5 years later with our third, and then 3.5 years later with our 4th. And it was a normal pregnancy, a normal birth, but when Colden was 2 months old, he also had a bad reaction to vaccine. I'm very careful to say that it's not the vaccine that I think that caused it. It was just kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. His body already had a lot of toxins in it, and he reacted very poorly. And so he had a fever of 104 degrees for 2 days. He went completely limp, and he never quite came out of that. And so while I knew something was wrong because he was my 4th, and at that point, you're knowing what's right and what's wrong and what looks different than your others. I kept saying something to the doctor, and I kept getting met with it. His next appointment, we'll see if he's met his requirements of where he's supposed to be at the 4-month, 6-month, 8-month checkup. And every time we got there, we just kept going back to that 2-month mark and saying we haven't moved forward from this 2-month point. And at that point, he was very limp. And so when he was 10 months old, finally the doctor had come in. And by the way, he saw him sitting in my lap, which was completely hunched over, head curled down. He said he has hypotonia, which was just something that we were able to say kind of defined where he was at with what he was experiencing. But we didn't actually have a diagnosis of what had caused that. And so we just knew he had severe low muscle tone throughout his entire body. And he couldn't lift up his arms. He couldn't lift up his head. All of his babbling had stopped. So we knew that there was something going on. And we started right away with our early intervention. That was really important. You probably didn't have a chance to do that because your diagnosis came later. I know you'll probably talk about yours. That was something that came earlier. And that was really important for us to get started right away. But it was also very exhausting because we had 8 therapies a week that we were doing within the house. And life as I was expecting looked very different because I felt like my house was always having to be show ready to be selling a home. You felt like you were always on and you didn't ever have a chance to sit back and relax and breathe because you were always going to the next appointment. But I knew it was always helping Colden. And so after we got through those 3 years of, once he turned 3, he's out of early intervention, we started kind of digging back and looking at what we could do differently. And it wasn't until it was actually 2 years, 8 months that he got the diagnosis of cerebral palsy from a doctor in Georgia over the phone. We had seen a couple of neurologists and no one had said he had cerebral palsy. That was never something that was mentioned to me. And so, of course, when I heard the word cerebral palsy, it sounded scary because I didn't know anything about cerebral palsy. To me, I just thought of cerebral palsy in a wheelchair and not being able to move. But there's very different levels of cerebral palsy. And so with Colden, thankfully, we did get him walking when he was just about 2 years, 8 months. That was really a big deal. We had started to see a chiropractor and kind of change our lifestyle and getting his neurosystem in line and intact. And he did start to walk, which was fantastic. That was a blessing for us. But he also has apraxia, so he cannot speak and he cannot eat solid food. So we're still all on baby pureed foods, and he's 8 years old. I don't know what his life will entail for him and what that's going to look like, but what I know is that God has a perfect plan for him, whatever that looks like. For me as a mom, I feel like I'm always trying to find the next therapy or the next thing to try to make life easier on Colden, but I know that's not the be-all, end-all. If that doesn't work, I know that's not going to stop him from being able to have a normal life or for us to continue on. But I feel like as a parent, everyone always wants the best for your child, so you're always going to search out different alternatives. I think the biggest thing, which we had mentioned before, chatting, for me, when I hear from family members to keep the faith and keep on praying, that's the hardest thing for me to hear, not about France at all, but it's hard because I know that he is perfect just the way he is, and God has a plan for him. I also know that in a blink of an eye, God can say, Colden, I'm going to make you perfect this side of heaven, and he can do that, but I also know he may choose to not do that, and he's going to have a very different life for us here and affect everybody, just like you were saying with Tyler. Colden is our most vivacious, outgoing, loud, and we say talkative even though he can't talk. He's the most social kid out of all of our kids. And we needed that in our family because we're more of a family of introverts. So he's the one that keeps us on our toes and brings a lot of joy and happiness to our household. He's the one who's always dancing. And I think with any child, any family, when you have a child with any kind of disability or special needs, that joy is easier to find because you're looking for that instead of trying to just focus on the negative. Because I think if you're focusing on that negative, that's all you're always going to see. So you really have to switch your mindset and look at the positive, and you'll see all of the blessings in your life, which are many, whether you have a child with special needs or not.
And I think also all of the little milestones
We
that
call them
we take
instones. Instones.
that you take for granted with your
Uh-huh.
other children
Absolutely.
are big deals.
They are.
With your special
Yep.
needs children.
I know we got to share the same amazing therapist, physical therapist, and it was so nice because every time we made progress in one area, she would share what is the next thing, what's the next step they're going to learn. And for all the other kids, it just came so naturally, but to be able to see that and look for it and see it happen, it was really cool to see just how God has created our bodies to learn, and you do appreciate them in a very different way, and you don't take them for granted. Absolutely. Yeah.
And we have fun rejoicing with you when
Yeah.
those inch stones
Yeah.
are,
Yes.
are accomplished.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it is, we can really appreciate
Uh-huh.
like what a big deal it is, and we want to celebrate those
Absolutely.
with you as well.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. Yeah.
All right, Jen?
All right. Well, my story starts with my pregnancy. When I was pregnant with Jackson, things were going along just fine, and all of a sudden, within 1 week's period of time, my blood pressure shot way up, and I went in for my doctor's appointment, and he's like, "Oh, this isn't looking so good," at that time, he's like, "You need to head right to the hospital." So I was 35 weeks and went straight to the hospital. He's like, "I think this baby's going to be born today." And as I was at the hospital waiting, because they didn't have a bed ready for me yet, I was sitting there, and the nurses kept walking by, and they would look at me like, "Ooh," I'm like, "Do I look that bad?" I'm like, "How bad do I look right now?" I know. I'm like, "Okay, something must not be going right here." But then they finally got me in the bed and hooked up to the monitors and everything. They were trying to draw my blood, and they couldn't because it was so thick. So what I found out later is I ended up with HELLP syndrome. So my blood pressure had shot way up. I had low platelets and elevated liver enzymes, and so I was very sick. And they were concerned about the baby, so they needed to do an emergency C-section. So I was out, they put me out with a general for him, and he was born at 35 weeks, and he was born, and his lungs were underdeveloped. So when he was born, they had to rush him to the NICU and bag him because his lungs, he wasn't able to breathe on his own. So he spent his first 4 days on a ventilator, and but did progress pretty well through that. But he was our first, so we weren't sure, like when you talk about milestones, we weren't sure, okay, well, we know we have to adjust because he was 5 weeks early. And, we're trying to see, well, he's not doing this quite yet, but he's doing these other things, so, I wasn't too concerned. So it wasn't until his brother was born a year and 4 days later, also early, he was born at 34 weeks, but he didn't have underdeveloped lungs. So as his younger brother was growing, and the same time frame, I'm like, okay, at this point last year, Jackson wasn't doing this quite yet, and then at this time, again, not that you're trying to compare your children, but like it's helpful to understand, well, since they both were preemies, they had that same adjustment. So we then, because we noticed then that he wasn't hitting the same milestones in the same time frame, we talked to the pediatrician and requested an evaluation through early intervention. And they came out, and I remember the first day it was very overwhelming because like all these people came in, and we just knew that because he was almost 3. We just knew that speech-wise he wasn't talking a whole lot, so I figured he needed speech therapy. And they did the whole evaluation, and they're like, okay, well, we really recommend speech, OT, working with a developmental therapist, and PT. I was like, okay, that's a lot more than I was expecting. And it was it was very overwhelming at that time to hear all of that, because I wasn't expecting that. But what a huge blessing it was. We had such wonderful therapists that helped him, and we were working on the skills that he was missing. And then we were able to, at that point then, through early intervention, we had a developmental pediatrician do an actual evaluation on him. And at that point in time, he was diagnosed with sensory regulatory disorder, because we had suspected that he had autism, but this developmental therapist was like, or pediatrician was like, no, he does not. This is what he has, and he has these sensory things, and that's why, but it presents very similar to autism. So we proceeded with that diagnosis, and he received services through preschool and through the grade school, and was getting pretty much the same services he would if he had an autism diagnosis, because those were the same things that were being presented. So he was being able to get the supports and things that he needed, which was really helpful. And then when he was at the end of 5th grade, we had him reevaluated, because it was, he was pretty young when he had the first evaluation. And the neuropsych at that point diagnosed him with autism and ADHD. And so he's very high functioning, but that was when he received that diagnosis. So he hadn't had that prior. But he's a wonderful kid. We love him. He is the light. He lights up our family so much. In elementary and junior high, he was referred to as the mayor because everybody knew who he was. He made sure everything was running. In elementary school, he would remind the principal and other teachers, don't forget you have this class going right now, and aren't you supposed to be doing this? And he was very well loved and embraced, and he has transitioned well into high school. And so, we just love him. I can't imagine things different than they are. For us, it was really helpful to have a diagnosis, just to make sure we could get the services that he needed, but it's not about the diagnosis. So Jackson now has a diagnosis of autism, but we've known he's had special needs all along, but that diagnosis doesn't define who he is. It's just something that we have so that we can then, for sure, get the supports that we need and have some, have the diagnosis to say, well, because of this, he does need these things for school, and he has benefited tremendously.
Right. It gives you backbone when you go into those IEP meetings to say this is why, and
and we've been very blessed because Jackson, our story is different than others at times in that Jackson has been able to receive and get the services that he's needed. We haven't had to, there haven't been very many things that we've had to fight for. They've seen and recognized that he's needed those things, and we've had wonderful teams all throughout that have really worked with him to help him to get the services that he needs. And it's made a big difference, because he's a freshman in high school now, and he's in all regular ed classes with the exception of a resource class. And I mean, and he's a good student now. He's not as, I know that if he wasn't dealing with some of these disabilities, he would be at a higher grade, as far as his grades are, but his grades are still really good grades, and he's in regular classes, so. It's really quite amazing that, I mean, you guys have known what I'm saying. It's like, the fact that he's there, I mean, I'm so amazed, and
And the high school that he's
joy.
at is outstanding for the programs that they have.
Yes.
for special needs.
Yes, they have, and the high school has a whole special needs department there, and so even though Jackson isn't in the special needs classes, the whole school really embraces kids with special needs, and it's very inclusive, and he is just, so he's had a really good transition, because I was concerned, because it's like going from junior high to high school, okay, this is more students, a bigger building, how is he going to do, and it's been a fantastic year. So.
We all live in the same school district, and I know we are in the same high school district, and that was my older two that are a freshman and a junior. I asked them, how do they react to children with special needs? Do they make fun of them? Do they bully them? Do you see anything like that? Because that's my concern when Colden gets there, because all the kids will be out of high school, so there won't be someone there to kind of watch and give me feedback. But they overwhelmingly say that they are so good and so kind, and I've even asked my kids about Jackson. Do you see them? Yep, no problems, and I love to hear that. It makes my heart feel good, knowing that children are being so well accepted. And I think that is one of those blessings with children with special needs that was brought to our family, is that my older three kids all have a new acceptance and understanding of children who aren't exactly like them, that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And to me, that is huge, that it's become this normal these days, right?
Right, and to your point, that the label, not wanting the label, and so many people I talk to think, oh, not in my backyard, or I don't want my child to be labeled this, but it has its benefits so that they can get the help that they need.
And speaking from the other side of school and education, those labels are really necessary for support as adults.
Right. And what I love about the three of you is that even with the label, you don't let that define you or your child. Where, and I think you said it when we first met, was you didn't want to be around with moms, with kids only with this problem. You wanted to live life and interact with Tyler, with everybody, and I thought that's good. So I think it's great that we have each other to support each other, but we're not surrounding ourselves just, we're not over-focusing on the problem.
And I don't know how you felt with that, but I know Carol and I have talked before about, part of me, my guilt was not wanting to be around other moms who were specifically special needs, because I didn't want a cry group. I didn't want a cry circle. That wasn't good for me. It may be good for other people. So if that's you, that may be what you need. But for me and my personality, I didn't need that. I didn't want something else that was going to make me feel like this is going to be so tough. I really wanted to stay positive and say, what can I do? Because this is going to be life. I want to move forward instead of stay stuck in that. And for me, I did not seek out special groups. At our church, they had a special needs ministry. We had tried Colden in that, but it didn't seem to be necessarily a good fit for him. He seemed to thrive with regular kids that were all doing normal things that kids were doing without any limitations at all. That was something that was really great for him. But sometimes it can make you not feel so good when you're surrounded by that. So to be able to commiserate but not complain, which I feel like our group is like, let's look at what are the benefits and the joys in it. It's much more uplifting for me than looking at what the negatives are.
And for us, I was new to the group, and we started out with a common interest of running. And I was running with Jen, and she said something about her child, and I was like, say what? Okay, she seems normal like that. And then Julie, and then Kindred was like, I am in a group of special need moms.
And you didn't
But
even
it's
plan
good.
it.
But that's not the thing that but it does, I would say,
Part
it
of our
does
life,
give us,
but-
well, it gives us a closer bond because we
Right.
share those,
Right.
experiences.
And then there's wisdom and in what you've been through or what I've been
Right.
through, and to say, it's okay.
It's-
You
mhm.
know,
Right.
you can have a bad day. You can sit down and cry your eyes out.
Yep.
I think Tyler was 17 the first time I heard cerebral palsy. And he did have a head trauma at birth, and they said it would be not a problem. So when I said to the pediatrician, "Wait, excuse me, but he doesn't have cerebral palsy." And he said he has static encephalopathy, which is cerebral palsy that doesn't progress. And I was like, why wasn't I told this for 17 years? And I went home, I felt so sorry for myself. I was a wreck. And I had already gone through accepting who Tyler was, but I was a wreck thinking, they held this back from me. But when you look at the whole story, I couldn't have accepted it
Right.
Right.
previously.
Right.
So it was when I came into this relationship with Tyler of him being just who God needed him to be, that could be revealed to me. So, and still I find out things. You know, so they'll drop me a little bomb, and it's like, whoa. But it's just another piece of information.
Yeah.
It's not who he is or who I am. He's still the same person.
Yeah, right. With cerebral palsy, I had always thought of that as just a birth injury. And yeah, for us, it was when he had that fever, it was the lack of oxygen to the brain for those 2 days. That was the cause of it. That was what initiated that. So yeah, when we finally had heard the term cerebral palsy, it was 2 or 3 days later, we took him to get a haircut. And it was the first time that I wasn't cutting his hair. And the woman who was cutting his hair, we walked in and she said, "Oh, does he have cerebral palsy?" And I was like, oh, no one's ever said this. All the neurologists, all the therapists that we'd seen, no one had said that term before. And I thought, what made you think that or say that? And she said it was because the way he walked, his hands were out a little bit, and his walk was a little different. And I thought, no one's ever said anything. So to hear that diagnosis from someone in Georgia 2 days prior, and then the hairdresser, I'm like, okay,
Your
why
hairdresser
was...
knows.
Yes,
everything.
that's right. But it turned out that she had a child who had cerebral palsy. So God, he just has a way of arranging the right people in the right place at the right time. And that's been such a special bond because she knows how he is. She knows how to deal with him. And it's just, it's neat the people that you can come across
Yeah.
with the diagnoses that you have and the new people and friendships that you make. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
What about your story?
So my story. So my story started with my oldest, Ethan, and he always was discrepant from his peers in school. He was just always a little bit slower. But I didn't really see it too much. And like I said, you don't want to compare your kids, but Kendra's daughter drew me a picture and had writing on it. And I was like, and they're the same age. And I'm thinking, wow. Then I would think, oh, it's because she's a girl and I have a boy. And he's athletic and right-brained and, you know, her daughter just must be stellar. So, but as we went through school and we were at a Christian academy, and thank God they said, we can't help him here anymore. You need to go to the public school to get services. So we went to the public school to get services, and me not knowing what, or Mike and I not knowing really just the terms and the lingo and all this to fight the school, and the administration at the time was unfortunately horrible. This was sort of before No Child Left Behind, and so we were saying, you know, what about this, he can't do this, he can't sound out a word, he can't spell, he says things backwards, and he had an element of anxiety. And the vice principal said, well, you could come to me with a piece of paper from a neuropsych telling me that all these things are wrong, but if he's functioning in the classroom, why should we help? And I was like, whoa. So it was a big fight, and I'm glad Mike and I fought the good fight, and we got him services. We never got the IEP, which is an individual education plan, but we got a 504, which is some accommodations in the classroom, but he has a very IEP-looking 504. But when we're talking about having the diagnosis and the labels, that should have and could have would have helped him if the administration was different. So that now he's a junior in high school, if he had an IEP, would just help him take in the standardized testings and the SAT, ACT, that sort of thing. So then, like you said, we had the second kid 5 years later, and we're like, wow, they're different. And I was like, wow, Evan, doesn't have any anxiety at all at the time. And Ethan's MO, his go-to would be to throw up. So Evan has the personality, he's very laid back, and so he would be waiting with us outside the bathroom while Ethan's nervous and his anxiety is getting higher and higher and he's throwing up. And so they used to say we're better together than we are apart, because they just kind of balanced each other. And now they're really different kids. So then as Evan grew up, we did find some anxiety in him, but it looked a little different. He had more of a anger issue with his anxiety, and with both of them, it was kind of which came first. The dyslexia caused the anxiety because they know they're different in school, or was it separate? And we still don't know the answer to that. I remember one day Ethan was going to go away to camp with all of his best buddies and sit on the bus, and he is just throwing up in the back of the bus, and I'm on the bus sweating, and I'm like, Mike, I'm ready for this kid to be medicated for his anxiety. And some moms would say, I'm not ready yet or whatever. And I'm like, but my kid is ready. And so I think that kind of stops people, the stigmas and the labels. They think, well, I can't have my kid medicated because what will people think? And it's like, this kid can't function. He can't even get on the bus with his best buddies and go to camp. And he was age appropriate and all that. So,
and only you as the parent can know
Right.
what's best and
Yeah.
what's the best fit for
Right.
them and for you.
Right. And Mike being a pharmacist, I felt comfortable in that he would know, yes, that's appropriate medication or that's not, and for this age and stuff. And so it's all worked
He's
out.
a pharmacist and a cameraman?
And cameraman.
Way to go, Mike.
Way to go.
Multi-talent.
So then, and so the diagnosis, so Ethan was diagnosed with dyslexia, OCD, which is really interesting diagnosis. It's really interesting to live with a child with OCD as well as a husband with OCD. Love you, dear. So then, it just, things just were just really different and really hard at the time. I just remember being out, it would be like t-ball or something really easy, and all the moms are in the shade on the blanket, and there I am in the outfield. And if you know me, I'm not the outfield mom. So I'm like, why is life so hard for me and it's so easy for them? And so that's where I think you can help with the diagnosis, because then with OCD I could be like, oh, okay, so we have to stop the obsession and move on. So it just kind of helped me help my child, versus just pretending like there's nothing going on.
Yeah, because once you know that there's a certain diagnosis or a certain thing that you're dealing with,
Right.
well then there are things that you can do to help address that and
Right.
help your child through those situations.
Right.
So
I became a better mother,
Yes.
knowing what I needed to do or not do. What would make it worse for him, what would make it easier for him. So then Evan came along, does not have an ounce of OCD in him, in fact. And he would say things, I'm like, Evan, pick that up. He's like, ugh, it'll bother Ethan or Dad, they'll pick it up for me. He's like the exact opposite. But he does have the anxiety that, like I said, kind of comes out in anger. And so we did medicate him as well, just to help him deal with his feelings a little bit better. And now sweet little Elise, she's in first grade and she just cannot read. She just cannot read. So now she's supposed to be book level HIJ, and she's still, I think, she went up to E, but now she's at D. So she's in a preschool level. And so the school is helping us. And what's good about that, it's the same problem. And so I kind of know.
You recognize.
I recognize it. I could recognize it at a younger age because she's in first grade. I knew in kindergarten. Ethan didn't get help until third grade, which I just wanted to prevent that and just get earlier intervention for them. But they're sweet. They can't. One of them can't spell a word. The other one can't read a word. And so I just think of, or write a word. And so it's just kind of fun because we embrace the adversity. I think that it brings us closer together as a family. It helps us understand other people. And when Ethan, Mike and I fought for him to have electronics in the classroom just to even the playing field. And so now all the kids have some sort of electronics, but at that time he didn't. And so people would say, Ethan, how come you have an iPad or a laptop? And he's like, oh, my mom bought me the premium program. So he would use humor to help him with his adversity. And he's still, the light went out, but that's okay. He still uses humor to help him through the situation. So.
Something that you had meant, I think we've all mentioned, and it's important for you guys that are listening, if you are confused about IEPs or the 504 plans, there are organizations that you can seek out that can help you work through that, because they can be daunting and overwhelming. I know when I go in for our, we go in usually every 6 months for our IEP meetings, I get the whole printout ahead of time of what we're going to be talking about and what the goals are, so that we can look through them as a family and decide, is that an appropriate goal? Do we need to up that level, or do we need to scale back a little bit because we haven't hit some other ones? So it can be overwhelming, but there are groups that can help you sort through some of that if you do get confused or if you're having a really difficult time with it.
Yes. Good.
I think there's another aspect that we didn't even touch on yet, and that's the effect on our other children.
Oh, right.
And
That's huge.
I know when our daughter went away to college, she called and was just broken, and she said, I don't feel the stress I felt at home. And she felt guilty about that. And that was real. And we always felt the stress, and our wisdom to her was, why do you think Dad and I dated? Why do you think we went on vacations for the weekend without you too? There is stress, but they learn compassion in a completely different manner. They are so much more tender-hearted, accepting of everyone. So much accepting that sometimes they adopt ridiculous a number of children. Right. So it changes who we are as parents. It changes who their siblings are. But just because we've embraced who they are, and that should be the same even without a child with disabilities. If you look at each child, they're all so different. Like you said, yours all have the same similar diagnosis, but they are so different. And each human being is different, and we need to embrace those differences in each of us. We all process differently. We've all had different things in our history that make us tell our stories differently.
Right. And I'm a dental hygienist. I see about 8 patients or more a day, and I'm always open about my story. I would notice patients would come in and they would be like, my kids are perfect, we took the perfect vacation, and I'd be like, so what's that like? And I would always be very open, and I can't tell you how many times I've had somebody come back to me and say, okay, it's going to be real today. Now, you told me about this, and where did you go for help for that? And you told me about this. And so I feel like just being open and like you said, not like a cry, but I'm always just real, and I'm always open about things, and I realize that not everybody is, but I just encourage people to, because I think your story, that's why I'm making the video, your story helps other people.
And if you look at our Facebook pages, they are real. There are the bombs and the breakthroughs. There are both of them.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I just want to mention real quick, when I first got the diagnosis with Ethan, I felt, I can't handle this. And people are like, oh, you're the perfect mom for him, or you're the right mom for each child. And I'm like, oh no. But like you said, God knew. God knew I would have this child, and I'd have this problem, and I could get through it, and whatever. And so I think you just rise to the occasion. You do your research, and you find out what the kid needs, doesn't need, and that sort of thing. But I remember feeling, not exactly why me, but sort of, like, why did this happen, and life is not as we expected, and
I went to school for special education and started working with a child with autism, and I thought, oh Lord, I do not have the patience for this. I cannot do this. So I kind of laughed later going, Lord, you're still working on the patience with me, aren't you? Because now I have a child with special needs. So I kind of think that's funny how it comes back around. But yeah, it's not, it's very different with the family, but you were talking about how does it affect the kids, but then it's different too for the husbands.
Right.
I know that could be a whole other conversation,
that's a whole nother-
because I know I process it very differently than my husband has, and for him, he has a hard time. He says, I took him to the doctor's office and everyone else, they were talking or they were reading a book and it was so depressing. And I'm like, well, I go through that on a daily basis with him when I go to all these places. So I was so used to it, but he's not used to seeing him out in the different places that I was taking him to the park. He didn't have to process another child who says, Mommy, what's wrong with him? And I overhear that. I knew those were things early on that I was going to have to face and that would come up. But he doesn't get to experience it the same way as a mom who's home with the kids and going through that. So spouses may take this very differently too, and it's going to look different than how you're feeling.
Yeah, true.
Another thing is many people will say, well, God only gives you what you can handle.
hate that.
That's
I
not
hate
true. This is way more than I could ever handle.
Right,
And
right.
not only is it way more than I could ever handle, it's way more than I ever wanted to handle.
Yeah,
So the expectation of what my life would be like is much different. However, God can handle it.
Right.
And
God
if He's
knows.
in control of it, then I don't have to handle it.
His mercies are new every day, and
Yes.
and we can.
And not to over religion this, but I think because of us having a faith-based attitude, that we do have it, we do have a good grasp on
Right.
our expectations being different than what
Right.
what
We have
thought
hope in
they
what
were.
the future looks like instead
Exactly.
of despair.
Right. I would feel a little lost, I think, if I was only relying on myself.
Yes.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah, well, good. Well, thank you, ladies. I just love all of you, and I appreciate you taking the time to share your story this morning. So, thanks for joining us, and tune in tomorrow when we're talking about something else.